All right, now I've already been over this, but I've got a column on this topic. I told you I was going to write a column on it. I couldn't get to it until this morning, so it's up now at afa.net. And I want to encourage you to get this column and to read it. Not because I ought to get a Pulitzer Prize for it. I'm not talking about the quality of the writing, which is just very ordinary. But I do want to talk about the content. I went over it, I believe, on Tuesday, but I'm going to refresh your memory with it because I think this is critically important. And I urge you to read this column. Title of the column at afa.net is Science Confirms Genesis Again. And I've got again all in capital letters. You know, one of the things I say frequently, and I'm going to say it again because repetition is the mother of learning. When people try to tell you that science and the Bible are in conflict, do not listen to them. Do not believe them. Do not let them deceive you. Now, my point is there can be a conflict between bad science and good theology. There can be a conflict between bad theology and good science, but it is not possible for there to be a conflict between good science and good theology. Why? Because God is the author of both. Now, I mentioned this earth-shattering gene survey has confirmed again that the best in science is perfectly consistent with the best in theology. This study ought to shake the theory of evolution to its foundation, to its roots. Now, you're not going to read about this in the talking snake media. They will bury this because it does not fit the evolutionary narrative. And by the way, let's not ever forget to call evolution what it is, a theory, and a bad one at that, but it is a theory, not a fact. Now, people will try to tell you that it's a fact. It is not. It is a theory. Nobody was there to observe evolution when it happened. It's by definition non-repeatable. You can't do it again and repeat however life came into being. Nobody was there to observe it. Cannot be a scientific fact or a scientific law. So it's a theory, not a fact. Do not let people lie to you about that. Now, this seismic article, which I mentioned earlier in the week, is an article about a study of 5 million gene snapshots. That's Gene, gene snapshots, which are referred to as DNA snapshots. I think I said snapshots. No, it's not. Snapshots is what it is if I misspoke. They're referred to as DNA barcodes, and these 5 million gene snapshots are on deposit in the GenBank database, which is managed by the U.S. government. Now, these barcodes have been taken from about 100,000 animal species by researchers all over the world. And these findings were published last week by a researcher at the Rockefeller University in New York and another researcher at the University of Basel in Switzerland. These findings, according to the article, are, quote, sure to jostle, if not overturn, more than one settled idea about how evolution unfolds, end quote. And that is the understatement of the year. And so notice the authors themselves are saying this will jostle the theory of evolution. It might even overturn more than one settled idea about evolution. Now, I would say that's a mild metaphor. These findings are more like an atomic bomb going off under the hoax of Darwinian evolution. And this study, I mentioned this Tuesday, but this study was prompted by a handheld genetic test that they use to bust sushi bars that are trying to pass off tilapia for tuna. And somewhere in the air, the people using this handheld test, why don't we use this on that GenBank with the 5 million DNA barcodes? So anyway, they did. Now, the first nuclear bombshell is this. Get ready for this. This is what the article says. Virtually all living things came into being at about the same time. Let me repeat that. These are my words, but this is the summary of the article. Virtually all living things, according to the scientists and the genetic information that they studied, virtually all living things came into being at about the same time. Here's a quote from the article. The study's most startling result, perhaps, is that 9 out of 10 species on Earth today, including humans, came into being 100,000 to 200,000 years ago. Now, I got a problem with that kind of time span. I think the universe is no more than 10,000 years old. But let's set that aside. for the moment. This conclusion is very surprising, and one of the researchers said, I fought against it as hard as I could because it is so contradictory to classic evolutionary ideology. That reaction is understandable according to the authors of the article. This is again from the article. How does one explain the fact that 90% of animal life, genetically speaking, is roughly the same age? That's a great question. How do you explain that? Remember, because evolution says that the process of getting to advanced life forms takes millions and millions and millions of years through tiny little incremental steps caused by beneficial genetic mutations, which never occur in nature, by the way. But how can evolution possibly be true when the scientific evidence, based on the best in genetic research, reveals that all living things came into existence at about the same time? Now, if this study is valid, no reason to believe it is not, if this study is valid, evolution cannot possibly be true because evolution seeks to convince us that all living things came into being through a tedious process that took millions and millions of years and consisted of tiny little incremental advances in animal life produced by beneficial genetic mutations, none of which have been detected in the natural world. Now I'm going to come back and finish up this article, and we'll take your phone calls in the next segment. I want to take your calls on evolution. Your experience with creation evolution, what you found in your educational experience, what you found in trying to talk to people about the creation viewpoint, the evolutionary viewpoint, what your view is and how it's changed over time. That's what I want to hear about. Number to call, 888-589-8840, 888-589-8840.
American Family Radio.
You're listening to Focal Point with Brian Fisher.
Brian Fisher.
Yeah, we were talking on the break. Brian Fisher is my name. Program is Focal Point. Number to call if you want to join our conversation about creation evolution. I want to know how your view of that has changed and why. If you started out as a creationist and you're now an evolutionist, why? If you started out as an evolutionist, you're now a creationist, why? What has changed your mind about the creation evolution issue? And if you've had discussions about this with people, either on the, particularly on the opposite side of your point of view on this, how did that go? How did it go when you debated and discussed this issue? That's what I want to know. 888-589-8840. So any comments you have on the creation evolution controversy and how your view has changed or modified or strengthened or weakened over time, that's what we want to hear. But Jeff and I were talking on the break about an attack in London. I mean, there's video up seeing. I saw the story on this morning. I didn't quite know how to exactly use it. But remember that in England, they're now trying to ban knives. They're saying we've banned guns, and look how well that's worked. We've banned guns, and so now people are getting knifed to death every day in London. They're having a rash of knife murders. And there was a video of this guy pulling out, that's probably, what is that, an 18-inch knife?
That's huge.
20-inch knife, 24-inch knife?
Probably like a sword of the days of old.
Looks like something you used to fend off a shark. And this guy pulled it out. He was riding a bike. He fell off his bike because a motorist kind of swerved in his lane. He got off his bike and started attacking this car and the driver with this knife that was 20 inches long. The driver had to finally get out of the car and run for his life. Mm-hmm. So the knife ban is not working out any better than the gun ban has worked in the UK. And one of the things, Jeff sent me a video of I told you that story about how people that study animals tell us that, look, cats, I mean household cats, the little pet cats, the furry little fuzzballs you have in your house, they're actually predators. And if they were big enough, they would sneak up on you and they would kill you. The only thing that protects you from your fluffy little fuzzball is that they're too big. If they were big enough, they would do it. And Jeff found this video of a cat with a real menacing look in his eyes. Yeah. He had a killer look, predatorial look, and he's sharpening his nails with a little nail file. So that was pretty good. All right, let me finish this article very quickly and send you to afa.net to read it. Again, this article is saying that all animal life, well, 90% of it, but for our purposes, all animal life, genetically speaking, is roughly the same age. How could that be if evolution is true? Remember, because evolution, they tell us, has got to take millions and millions and millions of years because it happens through tiny little incremental advances in the evolutionary process. Now, here is the other, and so you ask yourself the question, well, how did this happen? How did all of the animals come into being at the same time? We've got an answer, folks. The Creator created them all at the same time according to the Bible. According to Genesis 1, all animal life, including humans, came into being at the same time in the space of 6 days. We've got an answer for this that evolutionists do not have, and it was hilarious to see them flail around in this article trying to find some kind of evolutionary explanation for this. You know, they trotted out things like viruses, ice ages, new competitors, loss of food sources, but they didn't believe any one of those explanations themselves, didn't find any one of them plausible. So we know why all animal life came into being at the same time, because the Creator made them in the same week. Now, the other thing, the other jolting discovery is that, and again, this is fatal for the theory of evolution. Remember that evolutionists, Darwinian evolutionists, requires an untold number of transitional forms. That is, forms that are somewhere between one life form and a more advanced life form. Now, the reality is the fossil record has no transitional fossils for which a credible case can be made, not even one. Now, Darwin recognized this problem of missing links in his day. He said, look, but he thought the problem was that we just didn't have enough fossils. The more fossils we discover, we're going to discover all these transitional forms. Now, we've got 250,000 fossils, 250,000 fossils. Not one of them represents a transitional form. Even the ones that we used to have don't qualify anymore. The whole deal with the horse and the evolutionary scale, that's been blown up. The Archaeopteryx, they considered that a transitional form for a while. That one's been blown out of the water. And here's what this article says. Species have very clear genetic boundaries, and there's nothing much in between. So another reason these scientists looking at this genetic bank say that the reason no transitional forms have ever been found in the fossil record is simple. There aren't any. There are no transitional forms. Why? Because each species has a very clear genetic boundary. So there are fixed genetic boundaries between one life form and another, between one species and another. So there's absolutely no evidence of any so-called missing links. Well, where do we have an explanation of origins that fit with that discovery? Genesis 1 uses the phrase after their kind, according to their kind, according to its kind, to refer to how the animals that God created reproduce. What do? They reproduce according to their kind. What does that mean? There are very clear genetic boundaries between them. So bottom line, we've got a choice, ladies and gentlemen. We can go with an explanation of origins, evolution, which is contraindicated by virtually everything we know to be true scientifically, from genetics to biology to paleontology, or we can go with an explanation that fits snugly with what the Word of God tells us. I don't know about you, but for me and my house, we are going with the Word of God. Amen. Ladies and gentlemen, do not doubt this book.